Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Welcome back to episode 15, thinking about classroom management. Before I really get into today's episode, just a few things. Today that I'm recording, it is already Thursday, and it doesn't actually matter when you're listening to this because Thursday is very late for me to even just start an episode because I will typically start it earlier in the week. I like to start by Tuesday or Wednesday. So yeah, this is just feeling very, very late for me to be starting my recording on a Thursday because usually Fridays I'm pretty useless. I'm exhausted from the school week. And then so whatever from my episode is pending must be done on Saturday so that everything can be published on Sunday. So yes, I am starting this late. I am in week 2 of the 17-18 school year, and I don't know if you can tell or not, but I sound like a frog. So yeah, week 2, and I am already starting to get sick. I have had a sore throat pretty much the entirety of this week. I almost lost my voice at the end of, I want to say Monday or Tuesday, but I think it was Monday. And I was very, very frog-like that day. I'm surprised someone didn't try to take me out back to where our garden is and let me go. But yeah, I'm just continue to sound like a frog. I don't feel sick, feel fine, tired like I do feel every day. With my 6-year-old students. So nothing out of the ordinary, but very frog-like. So if you notice a difference, that is what's going on. I am coming down with a sore throat. And so the end of week 2, and certain things have come up, as I mentioned in a previous episode, that things are going to naturally come up. Actually, that's one of the really nice things about being back in the school year. A lot of the content is just kind of creating itself. So that's why I wanted to create this episode on classroom management, because of course this is critical to what we do on, this is the in and out of our life, because we have to have really good classroom management if we expect that teaching is going to occur. So this is what we do. This is what we established at the beginning of the school year. I am at a crossroads in my classroom management. For many, many years, I have used the Stoplight system, and I realize that this is something that is more typical in the younger years, in the younger grades. So, but it is something that I've used because I am teaching in the younger grades. But it's also something that I have used, I don't know how to say it, just basically because I've disliked it. I haven't used it because I dislike it, but I dislike it, but I haven't found anything else. So I pretty much have just used it because I haven't used another system, and I really have been wanting to get away from this. And in fact, one of the things I really, really wanted to do this year was to just not do it. But, the reality of what we do is that some of the decisions we make in our classrooms, the collective we as teachers, is that it's not always so easy to make those decisions, especially if you find that you're working with other teachers, maybe there are other activity teachers, maybe you have a co-teacher, maybe like in our situation where we have dual programs, so there's an English teacher, there's a Spanish teacher. So I just feel like these things get so complicated when there are many different thoughts on the matter. There are many different teachers involved. There are many different factors. Everyone, I think, coming from a really good place. We all want what's best for our kids, but I guess the issue is that when the challenge is what is best for our kids, and maybe what I think is best is not necessarily what someone else thinks is best, it just makes it very complicated. So I think I won't be moving away from the stoplight system just because at this point it wouldn't be a smooth transition, and I don't want to go away from it until it can be a smooth transition, because I think one of the things is if it's not smooth, perhaps that could set everything up for failure. So I won't be moving away from it. I am very disappointed, I'm going to admit. I was really hoping that by this time I could have something better in mind and a better system figured out in a better way, and that's just not possible. So I think perhaps it might be important to just explain why it is that I have been wanting to move away from the stoplight behavior management. So, anyone can look up, there's so much written, lots of controversy surrounding the stoplight system because while it is visual, it is visual, and it's visual for everyone. It's on display, and this can have a very negative effect on students. And I think the reality is when I think back to my own experiences with the stoplight system, it's like, the kids who are in green because they're making good choices, they're always going to be on green, pretty much. Those are the kids who are making those good choices. Those are the ones who it might come rather easy to them, or it's not so challenging, right? But then really where the system fails the students that it does fail are those who maybe are constantly having to move their clip down to yellow or red, or because of a poor choice that they've made. Now, I've always allowed for students to make better choices to move up. So I really have tried to make an attempt to make this as positive as I possibly can. But, the reality is that those kids who are moving down are typically going to be ones who you find that you really need to come up with different strategies for them anyway for behavior, because we know the reality of what we are working with. There are just, some students who are going to behave and do what you ask them, and there are going to be ones who are going to test the limits a little bit for whatever reason. And so in those cases, there's always the need to maybe modify or be flexible with something, or some way change it up for the particular needs of those students. So for those who are never moving down because they're just always making good choices, and they are always going to make good choices, regardless, they're going to make good choices. So even if you didn't have them on a color, they'd still be making good choices. It really doesn't hurt them so much as the ones who are having to move down, and then that becomes a public display on who has moved down. It's almost, to me, feels like a shaming, and I know that's not our intention. I do want to say that because I know that most teachers are going to be good teachers who would never in a million years try to humiliate their students. I strongly believe that. Now, reading through a lot of articles online, many posts that allows for comments, I have seen a lot of angry comments from grandparents, from parents, and I understand where they're coming from too, if they're experiencing their child coming home and crying regularly and feeling, very humiliated or even ashamed of having to turn the color again. It feels bad. And so I understand why those parents and grandparents might leave negative comments and say things like, some of the comments I've seen on the web are things like, you call yourself a teacher, how could you do this? So I do want to say that just being in the field of education, most teachers really have very good intentions. So I do not want this to sound like they don't. We go into education for typically very good reasons. And typically it's because we really enjoy working with kids and we genuinely care about them. I always say teaching is the kind of field that if you were not actually passionate about it, it would be pretty much like your worst nightmare. That is my view of it. So, I think most of us are in this field because we truly have that passion. We truly care about children and working with them and really just kind of making a difference in this world through those relationships that we make with the students. So, I really want to be careful about the way we look at this because I think when we don't understand where this is coming from, then maybe, if you're only seeing one side, and like I said, I completely can understand this from a parent side or the grandparent who's hearing his or her grandchild very upset. Of course, that from that perspective, it looks really bad, from the perspective of the teacher, the intention is not to humiliate anyone. The intention is not to call out attention on any certain student. The intention is that when you have a class of 20 some students, there has to be something in place. So you have to have some kind of a plan, and challenges will come up, and different years, different groups, different challenges. I have had groups where, it happens to be that there are students who don't really test the limits. That's just how it seems to be, maybe just one or two. But then I've had years where there are a handful of students, and then when you don't have systems in place, it becomes challenging to manage the behavior and the learning. And in fact, a lot of it can become behavior management if you're not careful to set up your classroom correctly. So, even though I have used the Stoplight system, I've still tried to put a positive spin to it. But essentially, that is why I've been not truly sold on it, is because I don't see in the end that it makes a huge, huge difference. Like I said, students who are making good choices are going to make good choices whether or not their clip is on green. A student who makes a poor choice, there will always be some sort of consequence that makes sense. For example, yesterday I had a student who, during word work time, they were using whiteboard markers and writing on their desks. That's something I have them do. And, well, I had a student who decided that he would color his hand with a marker instead. And, I said, oh, no, that's definitely not a responsible way to use the marker. And I asked him to stop. I asked him to then do the assignment on a sheet of paper, and I explained that for the rest of the day, he had lost the privilege of using the whiteboard marker because he was not being responsible, and then could potentially ruin the marker, and of course he was making a mess, and not focusing on what he was supposed to be doing, so he wasn't going to get much out of that activity that he had chosen instead. So this was just a very logical consequence, right? Like if you follow the responsive classroom and logical consequences. So that's an example of, I did not need a clip to do that. I did not need him to move his color down, because the consequence is the consequence. For me, the color is not the consequence. The consequence is what is going to naturally happen out of the student's action. They see that, okay, there was a consequence that came out of this. So that's one example. And then I had another student today who during reading time was coloring in her book. This was a paper book. It was, if you're familiar with the No Bono, we always start our school year and talk about the different rules of using a No Bono book, and then they get their own copy and they get to color it. Well, of course, in the beginning, when we don't really know how to do reading workshop, we're not doing it initially, so I first kind of teach them routines and whatnot, and they do get time to color in the book. But we're in week 2 now, and we have fully launched reading workshop and daily 3. I have combined the two. So right now we're reading, and actually today's mini lesson was the 3 different ways to read a book. So for the younger grades, the challenge is always, if you're not a teacher of really young children, imagine trying to do a reading workshop with students who do not read. So we teach them in the beginning that there are 3 ways to read a book. You can read the pictures, you can read the words, and you can retell a familiar story. So that was actually our lesson today. And when I sent the kids off to go into self-reading, that was the assignment, that they be practicing one of those 3 ways. But yeah, so I found a student actually coloring in her book, and really no bad intentions. I think she really didn't understand. Well, number one, didn't understand, because this one, her English is very limited right now. So I think there could have been a misunderstanding. And then adjusting into, like, now we're really practicing some of the ways that we read. But I did find her coloring. I asked her to stop and said, oh, no, we're reading. I reminded her what we were practicing. I went off, but checked in on her a couple minutes later to see that she was still coloring. So then I said, oh, you know what, I'm very sorry, but I just asked you to stop. And right now we're working on our reading, and it's going to be very difficult to grow your reading brain if you're coloring. So right now I'm going to ask you to put those crayons away, and as a consequence, you have lost the privilege to use the crayons for the rest of the day. And I asked her, do you understand why you lost that? And she repeated it. She did understand. And she fully accepted her consequence of losing the crayons, because she wasn't being responsible during that time. I did not need her to move her color down for that. I did not need to put on public display that she was no longer on green. There was no need for that kind of movement of anything. It really literally took just the same thing that would have happened anyway, because this is how I work with my students. Whether they're moving their clips or they're not moving their clips, there's going to be a consequence that ties into the inappropriate or irresponsible action on their part. That's just what it is. And I really find that the ones who end up moving down a lot, it's, that's all they need. If it's something like that, does a child really need to move their clip down for something like that? I mean, does a child even need to move his or her clip down? Those are the bigger arguments, and it is an argument. And I mean, like in a healthy argument, it's a discussion, because these are the things that, there's a lot of controversy. Look online, look up the Stoplight behavior system. There are schools of thought on this, and there are different ways that teachers will approach the system. But yeah, so that's really primarily why I am against it, and I would love to get away from it. I really just want to focus on what was the action. Let's keep an open dialogue. Let's dialogue privately. And then whatever consequence is appropriate for that action, that's what we do. I could care less about the color. What does yellow in the long run really mean? I don't know. I mean, I do know. It means slow down. Let's think about things. But what does it mean in terms of what it looks like? And half the time, after a student, by the end of the day, and let's say they got to orange, where it's like a 5-minute sit out from recess to reflect on your actions, you ask the child, okay, so why are you on orange? What happened? They don't even remember. So that whole reflective piece by that time becomes very non-reflective, because then when a student's like, oh, I don't remember, then you're digging through your memory. Okay, wait, why is the student on orange? That means that the student moved down a couple of times, but gee, I'm lucky to remember what actually happened. So it becomes very difficult for me oftentimes to prompt another student to remember back to what happened, because I don't necessarily remember it. And that also leads me to think, if it's worth remembering, I probably will. If there was a big enough incident, I'm going to remember that. And if it is such an incident, then that needs to be probably reported back to mom and dad, and so that they're made aware of, right? But those other minor, I used my crayon when I wasn't supposed to, I don't think we need to alert the media. I think those things can be handled in a very respectful way to the child, and in a way that's not made as like a public announcement. So when I say respectful, I do in many ways feel like it is a little disrespectful to put it on public announcement. Like I said, I'm guilty of doing this. I've been using this system with trying to just really do it in the nicest manner that I can, but I feel like there's a better way. I really feel that there is a better way. So that's, this has come up because just kind of rethinking my whole system and wondering, could this be the year that I am able to walk away from this kind of a system? And, as of yet, it's not. And that's not to say that sometime down the road, something better will emerge that really feels right for all parties involved and all factors involved. That could still happen, but for this year, I think we're just not quite there. We need to figure out something that is very solid. So, not there, but definitely working on it. So I am excited in that sense. But I do want to share a few other things that I do. And I know there's this whole idea, especially with like the responsive classroom, of also moving away from rewards. And again, it's another thing that I would love to, and I haven't quite figured out how to. But something else I've been doing is giving out these paper, what we call Starbucks, which actually another colleague of mine she moved from third grade into technology. She's now the technology teacher in our section, our elementary section, and she donated these Starbucks. And I just remember when she brought them in, I was like, oh, okay, well, I've never used something like that. I'm not sure how, but I may look into it. But I didn't realize at that time that actually the Starbucks are a huge part of my class. So again, this is going to be something that might be controversial because the whole reward system, and we really want kids to just do things to do it. But I do find this a little more positive because they receive the Starbucks. So I actually, in the beginning of the school year, I set it up to just more or less teach them about what a Starbucks is and how to use Starbucks. So students right now, they receive the Starbucks. So it's a paper, it's like a thing of $1, but it's paper. I actually have mine in yellow because the kids, if you've been listening, you know I'm in Mexico, so we don't have green bills. So I don't actually copy them in green. Maybe if I were in the States, I might, because it would make more sense. But I just copy them in yellow, and I hand them out as I see students are in task. Oh, you're being a kind neighbor, whatever. I pass out the Starbucks. They keep them in their pencil box, and then when they go to the, like, say the bathroom during work time, it costs one Starbucks. So they will put the Starbucks into the basket because that's the price to go. If it's carpet time, I really encourage that students do not go at carpet time. For obvious reasons, I will allow them to go if it's an emergency. I will never stop a child, but then the fee becomes 2 Starbucks. Believe me when I tell you that these kids become the best budgeters at age 5 and 6. I mean, when we first set up the Starbucks right now, it takes them a while to figure out, getting Starbucks, and then I have to pay to go to the bathroom. And then the next thing that Starbucks are used for is that on Fridays, when we do our Friday fun time, there is, first of all, I also do group points, so table points, very similar to the Starbucks, but they're earning table points for cleaning up on time and getting to the carpet on time. They earn group points during the week. So at the end of the week, they have to have 30 group points, or table points, basically, to be able to participate in Funtime Friday. And then there is an entrance fee that they pay in Starbucks, and due to inflation, that price increases throughout the school year. Right now, it's at 5 Starbucks, but as there's more circulation of Starbucks, that will increase, and that always becomes quite a hot topic when they hear about the increase to the entrance fee for participation on Friday. But so they become very good budgeters. And I guess I know it's controversial with the whole reward system, but it's also classroom economy. They get a lot out of it because they're counting their Starbucks, they're budgeting their Starbucks. So I'm not completely sold that this is a bad idea. And if you have any ideas or thoughts of your own about why you are maybe against a system like this, I'd love to hear about it. So leave a note on the Time to Teach page, or send me an email, which is also at the timetoteach.libsyn.com page. But I'd like to know if there's anyone, what maybe your reasons are, why you're very, very against it, if you are. But I'm not sold that it's truly, truly horrible for a student, just because I feel like there's so many benefits of the counting their Starbucks every day, and the budgeting, and then also aside from like the bathroom fees and entering into the Friday Fun Time fee, then there are additional that will give them the main activities that occur during Fun Time Friday, like there's puppets, there's Play-Doh, there's Legos, all of those things, that's included in the entrance fee. But if you want like an extra, if you want to enter the art station, there's an additional fee on top of that. If you want to do iPads, there's an additional fee on top of that. So this is also because we obviously have to earn back the Starbucks to be able to hand them out the following week. But they love the Starbucks. So I never imagined that when I started using the Starbucks and I accepted it and I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to try the Starbucks, but in all honesty, I don't know where this will take me or exactly how I will utilize it in the classroom. I could not have imagined at that point how much the kids really enjoy the Starbucks. And it hasn't been a negative thing because it's not like taking Starbucks away, although I will if they play with it during class time, because if you don't have a good way to manage that, you're going to have kids counting their Starbucks every opportunity they get. So I have had to implement a rule that you may count Starbucks at recess time, you may count Starbucks after school at the end of the day as you come in and we go through our end of day routines, that's fine. But then I also have the rule of if you are counting your Starbucks during class, you will lose them all. I will take them because you're not being responsible and it's distracting. And I have had to do that just a few times. So the kids will learn very, very quickly. So, but you need a plan if you decide you want to do something like this in your classroom, which I really do enjoy. I really, really do enjoy this primarily because the kids love it so much. But you'll need a plan in place because students will constantly be trying to count those Starbucks. So this is it is like a reward in a sense, but it's, I like it. I really, really like it. So, so that's another way. And then I've already explained doing the table point. So that's another, positive, like every time that I'm handing out a Starbucks or I'm giving a group point, I'm pointing out that positive behavior and really trying to keep the other behavior, the negative behavior that I see in class, a little more subtle and discreet with the student. So I want to put more attention on, so-and-so is sitting so nicely in his or her square. He or she is crisscross applesauce, hands in their lap, voices off. I'm going to be calling out these behaviors. This, I recognize, is not a strategy that's going to win you any points at the upper grades. Having been a teacher at the middle school and high school level, that's the last thing that they want because that's not considered cool and nobody at that age wants that kind of attention drawn to them. So I think for teachers of older grades, it's really important to, maybe privately recognize those things because I think, students are students and they do enjoy positive things. I can't remember if I've shared this on this podcast or not, but I remember my 9th grade English class, and I had a student who did something, I don't know, and I just remember saying, "Oh, I'm so proud of you," and he was like, "Miss," no, he didn't say miss. People here call me miss. But he was like, no one has ever said that to me. And he was a 15-year-old student. You could tell he very much appreciated it, but it was also sad that being 15, he somewhere down the line didn't hear that someone was proud of him. So, even though maybe in the older grades you're not necessarily calling out in front of an entire class, I think in your private interactions with the students, you definitely want to highlight those things and even just say, call out maybe what you're looking for. I'm looking for, what I say is I'm looking for a student who, and I will specifically name those behaviors. Is everything that we do perfect? It's not perfect. By any means, it's not perfect. But you're going to draw attention to where you want to draw attention and pull back a little bit from the attention that we don't want to focus on. And that, I feel, is extremely important when we're thinking about how to set up a classroom that is positive and that functions very well.
As I wrap up, I really do want to take a moment to also address teachers at the secondary level, because I think, we're all really battling the same thing, which is trying to juggle classroom management and also teach students and get to the heart of everything, which is really our relationships with the students, and even really with the parents. But this is a lot to juggle, and it's not easy. I was very fortunate at the end of last school year, the 17-18 school year, and I got to attend a presentation that was given by Rachel Joy Scott's father. Rachel Joy Scott was a victim at Columbine High School. I'm sure we've probably all heard, but that was one of the bloodiest, if not the bloodiest, massacres that happened at a school. I believe it was in 1999, because I would have been a senior then. And I remember coming home and watching this on the news the whole entire evening. And Rachel Joy Scott, I believe, was the very first victim at Columbine High School. Well, since her passing, her father has really become an advocate for ways that we can reach out to students and truly, do in essence what we would like to do, is building a community and keeping things positive. It very much sounds like what Rachel Joy Scott was doing in her last years. She was a very big advocate. Even though she was a high school student, she very much cared about maybe those students who were perhaps a little more vulnerable to certain situations, such as bullying or exclusion. And those were students who she really tried to reach out to, make friends with, advocate for them, and, maybe just get others on board as well, in terms of, she would befriend someone who perhaps lacked friends and get her friends to be friends with them. It sounds like she genuinely cared about others, and she wanted to make a difference. Her father is now going into schools with what is called Rachel's Challenge, and they're really going and working with students and challenging them to do acts of kindness, and really trying to build a supportive and caring community in schools. And it was very powerful listening to his presentation. Obviously, this is a father who has had such a great loss, one that I think, most people could not fathom that kind of a loss. And so it was very powerful for that reason alone, but also just listening to the kind of work that he's doing and the changes that he's made. One story he shared was that he went into a school, I think it was a high school, middle school or high school, but I believe it was high school, and they talked to the kids, and he said that a student came up to him afterwards and thanked him for the presentation that he'd given, because on that very day the student had planned to commit a very horrible act. I won't get into what that act was, but his intention was that day he would have gone home and committed a very horrible and devastating and life-changing act. But after the presentation and the talk, he no longer was going to do that. It had really kind of changed, or at least helped him to see something in a different light, something enough that he was able to really change what he'd been planning to do. And I'll say that this horrible act he was contemplating doing, and had decided to do, was really because he himself had been suffering and was a victim of abuse and violence. So, these presentations and what Rachel Joy Scott's father is doing is very powerful. And this is what I feel like, at every level, but, at the secondary levels, we can be doing, going in there and uniting students, helping them to find the similarities with them, teaching them about how to befriend others, giving them these random acts of kindness challenges, things that Rachel Joy Scott really is advocating for, and making a difference in many schools because of these kinds of programs. And I think really we need to be intentional in creating the kind of climate where students feel that they have a voice, where students feel that they have a place to fit in. Now, I know that there are many different reasons for students to act out, and in the worst cases, maybe to commit horrible acts. And, they are varied reasons. But we have to look at all of them. Yes, we see in many cases that a student is perhaps suffering from some type of depression, or something else is going on. But also we see that some of these students themselves have been students who are excluded, or they feel different, or they don't have a voice, they don't fit in. So when we're creating climate like that, we have to be intentional and really think about how do we set up a school climate where every student has a place, where every student has a voice, somehow has a voice. And how do we do that? It's a challenge. And how do we teach our students to do that? These things are challenging. But I do think a good place to start is by teaching compassion, teaching how we can connect and care about others. And I loved the idea of Rachel's challenge, where you're really getting students involved in doing acts of kindness. And then the more, it's like a chain, really, because, the more that they see it modeled, the more that they're going to do it. Then someone sees them, and then they do it, and it can really have a huge impact. And I think it could really change the lives of students who are perhaps starving for friendship, or starving for attention, because maybe they are someone who has no friends, who perhaps feels invisible inside the school. So we have to really think about those students, and how do we create a space that is inviting to them, that makes them feel that they want to be there, that makes them feel like they are part of the community. And that is part of our classroom management. I mean, in that case, it's more about the whole school climate, but inside our individual classrooms is where I think that needs to start, and then trickle out into the bigger school community. But there's so much that we can be doing just right inside our classrooms. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, because that pretty much concludes what I wanted to discuss today with the classroom management. So just kind of a quick recap. I really think that when we're setting up our classrooms and thinking about classroom management, the best thing that we can do for our students is to focus on the positive. Think about how we can focus on the good things that are happening, compliment and call out those positive behaviors. Use flexible seating if we need to. Use a quiet area or quiet space where any student is invited to go for any reason. If a student just wants a quiet space and has decided that on his or her own self, or it could be a space where you also might redirect someone to, but just really being kind of flexible in terms of how student movement might happen in class, if it's appropriate and needed. And, just keeping everything positive. Like I said, I really like the Starbucks, and I also like the table points, because these are things that students earn through their good choices. Again, this is recognizing the idea that there are schools of thought out there that we should not have to reward. So just keeping that in mind, but it is something that I personally do like and have found effective. I do like using those things in my classroom. And I think that even though this year I am still using the actual color, stoplight system where students can move down or back up, because I've always let my kids move back up, I'm really going to de-emphasize the colors this year. I mean, they might still be using it, but I'm going to get rid of the punch cards that I used to use, because I would have a punch card, it would have like 10 circles on it, and so that's essentially 2 school weeks. A student is on green, you punch the hole. When they finish it, they get to turn that in for a prize. I was really trying to figure out how I can use the stoplight system by de-emphasizing the colors, because it's, if I use it, I feel like they're being emphasized anyway. But I think that in my case, because I'm using the punch card with it, that really puts emphasis on the colors. So I'm going to take that away. I'm not going to do that. And instead, where I used to have, they could turn in the punch card and redeem it for tickets, like a ticket to sit on the beanbag, a ticket to clean off the whiteboard for a week, because they love things like that, a ticket to bring healthy food inside the classroom and eat it during the table group time when you're sitting at your table, not when you're sitting on the carpet. I'm going to let them purchase that. So that's going to now be in our store when we have our Fun Time Friday. So they can purchase that with their Starbucks. So that's how I think I'm going to manage that. I'm actually pretty excited. Much more excited than I was yesterday, because it's, now Friday. I started this recording yesterday on Thursday. And I kind of thought a little bit more about how to make this a little bit closer to what I'd like to do. And then lastly, of course, we said for the secondary levels, we really do need to think about how we can create a classroom climate and extend that into a school climate. And that's really by focusing on compassion, teaching compassion, modeling it, And, when we think about the Rachel's Challenge, really inviting students to participate in these acts of kindness, getting them excited about helping others and including others and spreading kindness so that it has a chain-like effect, really. And I think those are some steps that we can take, and I think we will see a positive, very positive changes when we go that approach. So I'm going to end that. That's it for episode 15. I can't believe it, 15 already. I wish you all a fantastic week. I'll be entering in week 3 now. Excited for that. And I wish you all a wonderful journey in this school year, and wishing you well as you set up your classroom management system. Until next week.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.